Many of our respondents, they express that they do not feel secure or financially stable. Others express that they feel stuck or unable to progress. And a majority also shared that they feel stressed, with many of them even considering migration as the best option for better opportunities.
But there's a worse outcome where we can have a future where the young people are marginalized and disengaged. And it is clear that that kind of a society is a society where drugs wreak havoc. Don't we have this expression in English which says, an idle mind is the devil's workshop? If we do not ensure we engage our young people, well, they'll be taken by the streets rather than being productively engaged with society.
Welcome to Act Now Caribbean, 5 years forward. In this podcast series, we are exploring the challenges, opportunities, and solutions shaping the Caribbean as we move toward the final 5 years of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Countries across our region are working towards the realization of the Sustainable Development Goals, including the ambition of building a better economy, one that creates opportunity, supports livelihoods, and leaves no one behind.
However, for many young people, that future economy is something that they are navigating right now. 3 words that shape how young people imagine their futures are employment, opportunity, and stability. But across the Caribbean, these words can carry something else: uncertainty, pressure, and difficult choices.
I'm Lindy-Ann Edwards-Alleyne.
And I'm Mikhail.
In this first episode, we explore a defining question. What does the future of work look like for Caribbean youth?
So across the world, conversations about the future of work often focus on big drivers: artificial intelligence, automation, digital transformation. Here in the Caribbean, the conversation is also grounded in something more immediate. For our young people, the future of work is not just about emerging technologies. It's about everyday realities, the realities of finding that first job, building skills that matter, earning enough to live independently, and deciding whether opportunity lies at home or abroad.
And this is why this conversation matters within the context of the 2030 Agenda, and especially within the context of Sustainable Development Goal 8, decent work and economic growth. A joint regional report from the International Labour Organization and the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean shows that youth participation in the labour market faces higher unemployment rates than adults.
These figures, they highlight high levels of unemployment and economic vulnerability among young people in the region, but statistics alone don't capture the full picture. And to better understand these realities, UNIC Caribbean, we invited young people across the region to share their experiences navigating today's job market. Through a short survey, we heard from young adults ages 18 to 35, representing 12 countries. Their responses gave us a snapshot of how young people are navigating work today. To support this discussion, we also sat down with the Director for ILO Decent Work Team and Office for the Caribbean, Dr. Joni Musabayana. As the agency responsible for decent work and economic growth, the ILO defines youth as persons aged 15 to 25. However, for the exploration of this theme, we focused on young adults in the Caribbean 18 to 35, who are usually the youngest group navigating the realities of employment. And when it comes to the term decent work, it includes opportunities for work that is productive and delivers a fair income, security in the workplace and social protection for all, as well as better prospects for personal development and social integration, along with freedom for people to express their concerns, organize, and participate in the decisions that affect their lives, and equality of opportunity and treatment for all.
So let's dive into the UNIC Caribbean survey. One of our first questions asked respondents about their current employment status, and the results showed a mixed picture. Around 34% are in full-time employment. However, 40% are unemployed and actively seeking work. The rest are in contract or temporary work, freelancing, self-employment, or internships. What emerges is not necessarily a lack of work opportunities. It is something more complex. Employment exists, but stability and security are harder to find. And this sentiment would be reflected again where respondents shared how they felt about work in the Caribbean.
So what we found interesting during our interview with the ILO was the role that achieving decent work plays in supporting the interconnected framework of the Sustainable Development Goals and their targets. This is what Director Musabayana had to say.
We like to see SDG 8 as, if I could say, the engine room. If countries that work and make progress towards SDG 8, per definition, are also hitting the other SDGs. So let me explain a bit further. If you can promote decent work, that means you are also tackling poverty, because central to the concept of decent work is fair remuneration through collective bargaining. And if we can bring income from work into the home, we immediately tackle the scourge of poverty. And through ILO work, we have conventions that are related to equality of opportunity, Convention 100 and 111, and non-discrimination. So if in that work, gender equality is a key concept, and we have the concept of equal pay for work of equal value. And in that, we also look particularly at the issue of the gender pay gap. So by addressing workplace gender inequality issues, we are, per definition, also addressing the gender targets. So SDG 8 enables us to address, if we are addressing workplace issues, we are also implicitly addressing the issues of migrant workers. So we are also tackling issues related to migration. Through addressing SDG 8, we are also addressing issues of social protection. So we are also dealing with the issues related to, let's say, equal access to opportunity for protection for all. So through SDG 8, we are already tackling the other integrated SDGs.
Many of our respondents who are employed, they express that they do not feel secure or financially stable. Others express that they feel stuck or unable to progress. And a majority also shared that they feel stressed, trying to remain employed or find work, with many of them even considering migration as the best option for better opportunities.
In reality, most of us know someone in this situation. Maybe you are that person listening to us right now. And this raises an important concern about the emotional and psychological toll of instability. In the real world, this can look like young adults living at home longer with family, facing family and societal pressures while feeling stuck, as well as feeling a lack of independence.
Beyond employment status, we also asked respondents how they actually feel about their current work or career prospects. And the responses painted a picture where we saw 41% share that they feel frustrated, 27% felt discouraged, 23% stated that they are cautiously optimistic, and only 9% share that they feel hopeful about their current work or career prospects. So these responses, they reflect a generation that is not disengaged from work, but actually navigating an environment that to them feels uncertain.
And this matters because the future of work is not only about whether jobs exist. It is about whether young people can actually see themselves in those jobs and see a future in them. This is where Director Musabayana provides insight into why the United Nations places emphasis on young people in the world of work and why specific targets aimed at supporting youth employment have been included in our mandate.
If we want a future, that future is necessarily about young people. And the more we put young people at the center of that future, the better it is for all of us. But there's a worse outcome where we can have a future where the young people are marginalized and disengaged. And it is clear that that kind of a society is a society where drugs wreak havoc, because young people not sufficiently engaged don't we have this expression in English which says, an idle mind is the devil's workshop? And it really shows that in societies where young people are not sufficiently engaged, so where the not in education, not in training, not in employment component is high, just look at what's happening in the streets, particularly with drugs. And then if we do not ensure we engage our young people, well, they'll be taken by the streets rather than being productively engaged with society. So the question as to why the UN is preoccupied with youth is because we want to safeguard the future. And related with drug abuse and alcohol abuse is crime. So not only will we have young people engaged in that, but we also have societies that are wrecked by crime. And look throughout the Caribbean region, the challenge of crime. We are here in Trinidad and Tobago, and you know that Her Excellency, the Prime Minister, has made the issue of crime and fighting crime central to almost her whole domestic strategy, and dare I say also her regional and international strategy. And you have seen the alliances precisely because we are trying to find what is the most effective way to combat the dual related issue of drugs and crime.
What about pathways into work? Here is a quote from one of our survey respondents. There's a stereotype that young people don't want to work. I disagree. I think young people want to work and have dreams, but don't often know the pathway to getting there.
Traditionally, pathways into work were clearer. There were internships and apprenticeships, technical and vocational training, family businesses and entrepreneurship, along with education. These pathways, they still exist, but we have seen that in recent times, industries have been rapidly evolving and pathways are shifting just as quickly. So here we have another quote that says, no matter the level of your education, there's still much struggle in finding work or even work in the fields that you studied for. So as we see, this highlights a disconnect between education and labor market demands. Let's hear a bit on this from Director Musabayana.
Where there's a misalignment between the type of education that is provided and the skills that is required for work, then we have a skills mismatch, where we may have job opportunities, but we don't have the young people that are fit for purpose to take up those jobs. Hence, you have the phenomena of youth unemployment. And that is a challenge in the Caribbean context. An implicit element of that challenge has to do with young women. And in that regard, you can see that youth unemployment is already quite high in the 20s, upper 20s, but the young girls are particularly afflicted by it. And if I go further and talk about this issue of, we have a concept called not in education, not in employment, and not in training, NEET. And the percentages there are particularly striking. For young boys, that percentage is 13%. But for young girls, it's double at 26%. So the likelihood of young girls not being either in education, or in training is double the young. So there is a structural challenge in society on how we take young people generally into the world of work, which speaks to a misalignment between the type of education and the nature of the jobs that are required. But more importantly, is this misalignment, particularly when it comes to the distinction between young men and young women.
We see that this now becomes a call to action for educational institutions. For those listening, as one respondent put it, tradition does not stay the same and society evolves, so we must evolve with it. The path into work is evolving, and so are the skills required to navigate it.
Okay, so Mikhail, let's talk a bit about the experience of entering the job market, right? Off the top of your head, what can you identify? What do you remember are some of the barriers, some of the friction points that would frustrate a young person entering into the job market and their ability to find stability there and their ability to grow?
Okay, so off the top of my head, some that I could think of are exhaustive application processes, where a single application can leave you feeling burnt out by the end of it. And talking about demanding, there's also those excessively demanding multi-stage interviews. There's also lack of follow-up from hiring organizations. Also, I could think of, I would say, jobs that are advertised as a single role, but in reality, when you read into it, you realize that it's multiple jobs in one. For example, a position that says they're looking for a social media manager. But then when you read it, you see that they're looking for a social media manager, a protocol officer, a graphic design artist, an administration clerk, and all of these things in one. What about you, Lindy?
Well, I mean, it's been a while since I've been at an entry-level position. I'm a little older than you. However, I think that we can't forget about that experience trap for entry-level positions, where you need a job to get experience, but you also need experience, or you're required to have experience to get a job. Now, there are other opportunities for gaining experience, including volunteering or unpaid internships. However, it's important for us to know that these opportunities are not equally accessible or attractive for many young people, including those without a financial and other types of safety nets. So from application processes to the experience trap, young people are navigating multiple barriers. According to our survey, 76% of respondents said that entry-level roles require too much experience. And furthermore, young people, according to our survey, they are asking for a chance to demonstrate that their lack of experience does not equate to a lack of capacity.
Back to those rapidly evolving industries, this now leads to a deeper question. Are young people struggling to find work, or are structural barriers making that transition into decent work harder? To me, this matters because it now shifts the conversation towards systems, and from asking why aren't young people succeeding to what systems need to evolve to better support them. And when we examine these systems through areas like the platform economy and AI, we see that for young women, the barriers are not always the same.
The data is now showing that, back again to young women in general, they are being disproportionately impacted by the impact of artificial intelligence. And maybe it's clear to see why. If you look here in the Caribbean, the percentage of women in, let's say, the clerical administrative type jobs is very high. And it is there that artificial intelligence is impacting the most. So the nature of the jobs where you find the majority of women, these are the jobs that are most vulnerable to the impact of the displacement effect of artificial intelligence. So in some ways you could say then women, young workers are being hit by a double whammy. On the one hand, you're not being given necessarily fair remuneration. On another, you are not likely to be in education, in employment, or in training. And then on others, if you happen to be working, yours are the type of jobs that are most likely going to be impacted the most. So really spare a thought as we talk about youth, that there's this particular category, which are young women who are really disproportionately affected in the labor market as we speak.
Going beyond the data, we wanted to hear directly from young people, as in hear their voices, not just what they're facing, but what they believe needs to change. Because they're not just navigating the system, they're living it. And one of the questions we asked was simple, but we thought pertinent. What is the most important strategy needed within the next 5 years to support youth employment?
Hi, my name is Mikhail and I'm from Trinidad and Tobago, and I'm 26 years old. The most important strategy over the next 5 years is creating a real pathway for young people in the Caribbean to turn ideas into sustainable careers. Many young people in the region are creative and entrepreneurial, but they face such limited funding, lack of infrastructure, and foreign exchange challenges that make it difficult to access global market technologies and partnerships. To address this, governments and institutions should invest more in youth-led initiatives that connect local talent to international opportunities through grants, mentorships, and cross-border collaboration. Empowering youth innovation today will help build a stronger, more resilient Caribbean economy tomorrow.
That idea of real pathways, it stands out because it's not just about talent, it's about access. Young people are innovating and building, but they're doing it within systems that don't always support growth. They face hurdles such as limited funding, infrastructure gaps, and barriers to global markets.
Indeed. We also heard from Abigail in Antigua and Barbuda, who highlights another dimension. Let's listen.
So one thing that I believe the government can do in the Caribbean to support young people who are trying to build a career is they should strengthen the school to work pathways. So many of our Caribbean students, they would graduate with a degree, but when they come back, there's no jobs in their field that they studied. So I believe from the secondary level, the government should create internship and apprenticeship programs with local businesses, private sectors, and it should also partner with universities. It could be local or international, and they could provide career mentorship and practical work experience. I believe at the fifth form level that each student should have the opportunity to sit with a guidance counselor and discuss, what they're interested most in and the pathway they're going to choose. If it is that they do decide to pursue further studies or if they want to start their own business, I believe that guidance should be provided.
Her point about school to work pathways is critical because for many young people, the challenge doesn't start at employment. It starts at the transition into employment. You do everything you're told. You study, you earn the qualifications, and then you're faced with a job market that doesn't align with that path. Or by the time you are finished with education, the labor market demands have evolved.
And this was highlighted in the survey a number of times actually. And we also heard about it, this particular misalignment and skills mismatch from ILO as well. Young people, they are now speaking about the disconnect between education and opportunity, and that lack of guidance in navigating that transition. Some expressed uncertainty about where they fit. Others, they spoke about needing more mentorship, more exposure, along with more practical experience. So we now see that young people are asking for alignment between education and employment, skills and opportunity, as well as effort and outcome. So we need these things in order for it to make sense.
So, Mikhail, the challenges we're hearing are not isolated issues. They are systemic. So the question then becomes, how do we take these individual experiences, these very real insights, and translate them into something bigger? Because if the challenges are systemic, then the solutions have to be systemic as well.
It does make you wonder, how do we move from individual effort to systems that support young people at scale? Because what we're seeing is not a lack of ambition or initiative, as shown through our quotes that we would have shared, and voice messages. Young people, they're finding ways to work, but many are doing so without stability, progression, or support structures that are needed to sustain it. This now shifts the conversation towards system design, and one of the key points from the ILO is that real change requires examining the system that governs work itself.
We think that this is a very important strategic, approach. And in that regard, for us, first of all, to impact the structure and functioning of the labor market, at the center of it is the labor law. We are very actively advocating for and working with different countries not to amend, but to upgrade the law. The majority of the pieces of legislation in the Caribbean, I'm sorry to say, are very outdated. I think everyone who is in this area will agree. And if I may add further, most of the pieces of legislation largely from the colonial era. So that's why I'm talking about upgrading the law, rather than too often we're preoccupied with amending this section or that section of it, which seems to imply that we think that the base foundation and philosophy of which the law was based is correct, but it's not. So we don't believe that achieving systemic change is picking and choosing this institution or that. We have to change the foundation and infuse principles and values that are rights-based, and then seek how we capacitate these institutions to work in that regard. It is then that we can safely say it is easier to pursue the agenda of equality and equality for all. And that's why we talk about decent work for all. Whether it is young people, whether it is women, whether it is people with disability, whether it is migrant workers, whether it is indigenous people, all of these are easier to pursue when the law is sufficiently rights-based and rights-driven.
So that idea of outdated labor frameworks is important, because even as the world of work evolves with freelancing, platform work, and digital jobs, the systems that regulate work are not keeping pace. This means many young people are entering a labor market where protections are unclear or difficult to access. So again, this is not just about creating opportunities, it is about ensuring those opportunities are fair, secure, and sustainable. In a word, in fact, in two words, decent work.
Now, here we have another dimension. What exactly are we preparing young people for? Because if we're talking about the next 5 years, then we also have to be clear about the kind of economy that we are building here in the Caribbean.
I don't hear this conversation enough, I'm sorry to say. Now, I wish and I would like to work towards, in the Caribbean region, a simple narrative like this, which we can say to the young people, the future looks like tourism, the future looks like green jobs, the blue economy. And dare I say, we still need a future of agriculture, because the historical origins of these islands was largely again about agriculture. An unfortunate employment relationship, which is slavery. But that potential, so that definitely we need to find a way to hook all the things we're doing, the agricultural push that we are making. How can we make agriculture attractive? In Africa, we talk about making agriculture sexy for young people. And how can we make agriculture attractive? How can we make tourism the gradation, and what is my career path? If I go to tourism, I don't want to know that I'm always at the bottom of the pyramid. I want to know that there's a pathway for me to go upwards. And if I may dream, and maybe that's not my place, what about ownership? If I'm a young person, if I would know that I have a possibility, if I play my cards right and do everything, I could end up owning a hotel chain in the Caribbean. I could end up owning a cruise company in the Caribbean. These, I think, are the big picture ideas that we need to sell. And I wish we could have more of them, because I don't feel I hear them enough.
That idea of defining the future economy, it feels critical, because without that clarity, young people, they're left navigating uncertainty without a clear sense of where opportunity will exist. In our survey, many young people, they expressed that they feel stuck. Many expressed feeling financially insecure. And a number of them, they're actively considering leaving the region for better opportunities.
Building a better economy is not just about growth. It is about alignment. Alignment between education and labor market needs, skills and opportunity, as well as effort and outcome. And ultimately, alignment between what young people are preparing for and what the region, our Caribbean region, is actually building toward. And while much of this conversation has focused on challenges, it is just as important to ask, where is the opportunity?
The tourism sector, the definition, is the biggest driver of the majority of the Caribbean countries. But of course, we know also there are countries which are now also oil and gas countries. So the oil and gas sector becomes quite a big sector. And I think tourism, as automation increases, as people probably have more spare time, is one of the sectors of the future. We also have the green and blue economy. It's clear that the transitions we need from, let's say, high carbon use to the green future that we desire And also, particularly because we're in the Caribbean, the advantage we have with the blue economy, these are opportunities that are before us, and these are sectors of the future. The care sector, given the aging population dynamic, is going to be with us. And there again, we have largely higher percentages of women, but then it should be recognized as a sector in its own rights, which also needs much greater attention so that it doesn't replicate the inequalities of the past. The digital economy still offers opportunity, but as we have said, we have to look at the issue of the digital divide and ensure that we are not recreating conditions of inequity in the process. What we are trying to focus on is to ensure that as we prepare young people for these sectors, we should disproportionately seek to advantage young women and girls, as we have said, because they've been carrying the heavier end of the stick up until now.
There are sectors that are showing real promise: the digital and ICT spaces, the green and blue economies, tourism, as well as the care economy. So the question is not just where opportunity exists, but who that opportunity is reaching. Are all young people being prepared to access these sectors in meaningful ways? And are we being intentional about ensuring that young women and other underrepresented groups are not being left behind as these industries grow? Because opportunity alone isn't enough. We have to ask, are we investing in the right skills? Are we removing barriers to entry? Are we closing gaps in access, whether that's digital, financial, or structural? Because if those connections aren't made, then even high growth sectors can still feel out of reach. And that brings us full circle to what this episode has really been about. Not just the future of work, but whether young people can truly see themselves in it.
So as we look toward the next 5 years, leading up to 2030, one thing is clear. The future of work in the Caribbean is not something that we are waiting for. It is already taking shape in the choices young people are making. It's also taking shape in the systems that they are navigating. And it's taking shape in the opportunities they are either able or unable to access. This is why SDG 8, decent work and economic growth, matters so deeply at this moment. This isn't just about employment, it's also about dignity, stability, and the ability for young people to build lives that feel secure and meaningful.
So as we come to the end of this episode, on behalf of Mikhail and myself, we want to say a sincere thank you to everyone who contributed to our survey, shared their experiences, and added their voice to this conversation. A special thanks to the ILO Decent Work team and Office for the Caribbean for helping us ground this discussion in both data and direction. You've been listening to Act Now Caribbean, 5 years forward. If this conversation resonated with you, share it, start a discussion, and add your voice. Because a better economy and the future of work in the Caribbean is not just a policy conversation, it's a shared responsibility, and we all have a role to play. This is the United Nations Information Center for the Caribbean area, the voice of the United Nations in the Caribbean. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. For more content in this series, find and follow this podcast on popular streaming platforms.